I really got the feeling of a guy sort of trying his best to repeat the talking points, but very constrained, like unable to say certain things. Not because those things might harm the interests of the U.S. government. He was happy to attack, for example, the U.S. military and say they're more brutal than the Israeli military. Okay. But unwilling to say certain things because they might reflect poorly on the Israeli government. And you sort of thinking about this for a second, you're like, wait, you're the U.S. ambassador. You're our representative to a foreign country. Why is your red line criticism of that country? Shouldn't you be representing us? And it was very obvious he was representing the Israelis. Obvious. And again, you can judge for yourself.
That's right. You can judge for yourself. And if you want to watch the full 2.5 hours, I highly recommend it. It's very informative. Some people may be wondering, why is this so pertinent? Why does this matter so much? Well, other than the fact that we're on the brink of a very significant war, if not a full-on ground war invasion of Iran, the other reason that this is important is because, as I've highlighted over the past couple years of doing Liberty Lockdown, hi, this is Clint Russell, welcome back, is that it seems more and more apparent that we do not have sovereignty, that we do not have the ability to vote for a change in direction, particularly when it comes to foreign policy, particularly when it comes to foreign policy for one particular country. Doesn't matter. Left, right, we get the same thing. And at its core, the primary ideology that adds fuel to this fire is called dispensationalism or Christian Zionism, or Zionism more broadly. And Mike Huckabee is one of those proud Christian Zionists. And he had over 2 hours to try and explain his worldview to Tucker Carlson, and he really failed to do so. And it's not that he failed to do so for lack of trying, but rather because I believe that the argument is so full of holes that it's impossible to make a quality defense of that position. So why does it matter? It matters because the huge support for that worldview comes from Christians in America, which believe to their core, in a very loving way, that they must defend Israel to get into heaven. Like, this is no exaggeration. Like, that's honestly what many Christians in America believe. There's variants of that. Some of them believe that it brings about the rapture. But regardless, they believe that we must sacrifice basically our nation on behalf of a foreign one. And while principally and philosophically I oppose that simply because I'm a non-interventionist libertarian, I also oppose it on moral grounds because I believe that the people who are being taxed against their will in the United States ought to be the primary benefactors of those stolen dollars. That is not happening. Now, that's not to say that all of our financial woes are a product of us sending billions and billions of dollars to Israel. Obviously, it's not. But when you add in our military intervention on behalf of Israel when it comes to Iraq, Afghanistan, basically the entire global war on terror and the upcoming war with Iran, well, then you start to quantify that and you're looking at trillions of dollars. In fact, probably around 10 trillion so far, and could be God knows how much if we actually do have a full-on ground invasion of Iran coming up here soon. And I hate to do this preface, but it seems like it's necessary because if I don't do it, then I'm accused of being a hater. This is not about hate. In fact, this is about love. Love of my own country. Love of my own people. Love for peace. Love for prosperity. Not that it matters, but two of my best friends in this podcasting world are Robbie the Fire Bernstein and Dave Smith, both Jewish, neither of which are Zionists. Many of my best friends growing up were Jewish. Was never an issue. Literally. Never. Never mattered to me at all. Still doesn't. But what I don't like is when my nation takes a back seat after being robbed to the benefit of a foreign one. And I think that anybody being honest about this ought to be able to view this for what it is, which is we are being bled, both literally when it comes to our soldiers and economically when it comes to the United States balance sheet and to the taxpaying dollar. So while this episode will be very, very critical of our relationship with Israel, I just wanted to make it very clear that this is not some sort of condemnation broad-based against Jewish people. Honestly, it shouldn't need to be said. If you've watched my show for any amount of time, I think that that comes through, that this is not a hate-filled proposition, but rather one that I think is necessary. I think in many ways, it's the biggest question that we face as a people. And by a people, I mean Americans. Are we ever going to reclaim our own government? Are we ever going to actually have a government that looks after us first and foremost? In my opinion, and my preference would be that we have a government that only concerns itself with us. That seems like a very basic ask, and yet there has been an enormous debate over the past 3 years in particular when it comes to this topic. The hallmark of that debate have been slurs and yelling and condemnations. I'm not interested in doing that. I am merely interested in reclaiming our government and making it work for us, the people who live here. I know it's a very hateful worldview. And to that end, we're going to be dissecting some of the more, concerning highlights from this interview with Tucker Carlson and Mike Huckabee. And in the second half of this episode, I'm going to be unpacking the, kind of testimony. I don't even know if it was on the record, but Leslie Wexner, a confidant and business partner with one Jeffrey Epstein, finally spoke with the Congressional House Oversight Committee, and there was some incredible insights that we received from that conversation. So we'll get there right after this.
You've appealed to Genesis. Genesis 15 says it's Abram, it's pre-Abraham, it's Abram, receives from God the news that his descendants will inherit the land from the Euphrates to the Nile. I think that's right. And that would include basically the entire Middle East. That would be the Levant. So that would be Israel, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon. It would also be big parts of Saudi Arabia and Iraq. It would be,
I'm not sure it would go that far. It would be a big...
Off with a sledgehammer there. It would be fine if they took it all. What he's describing is, as Tucker elucidated, basically the entire Middle East. This is, just a reminder, this is the United States ambassador to Israel, as in he's supposed to represent United States, American interests in his role as ambassador to Israel. Just imagine for a second if the United States ambassador to Russia were to say that Russia has a deed because of God says so to Ukraine and a whole bunch of other Eastern Bloc nations. What kind of uproar and outcry would that create? Well, it would be universal, and justifiably so, because that's an insane thing to think, much less say, much less believe, much less say in front of the world on one of the largest, if not the largest political podcasts in the world. To call it reckless doesn't even do it justice. It is psychotic. It is a psychotic perspective to hold. These are nations that have been possessed, controlled, defended, and lived on by a different set of people for hundreds, in some cases, thousands of years. And yet, Mike Huckabee, a man who allegedly represents United States interests, says that they'd be fine if they take it all. It's just crazy. It's, reckless beyond words. But the logic of Tucker's question is flawless. If you're going to use biblical passages to defend their right to that land, then it has to stick to the actual biblical passage. It can't just be, well, God granted them this land. Okay, let's look it up. Which land did he grant to them? Well, from the Nile to the Euphrates. Well, that's basically all of the Middle East. So why do they get this little sliver? Why do they only get Israel? What about all these other countries? Oh, well, I guess if they wanted that, that's theirs too. And the reason that this is a big deal, for those that aren't familiar, is because of the Greater Israel Project, because of the West Clark 7, because of the history of United States intervention as well as militarism from Israel against their neighbors, which makes it look more and more evident that, in fact, that is what they are intending to do. That is what they have been working on for a very long time, as in decades now. And most galling, by far, is that they are using our blood and treasure. And I don't even like using that phrase because I think it diminishes what it actually is. American boys, young men, dying in the deserts to get land for a people that are not their own. Think about how fucking evil that is. And then on top of that, we pay for it. So even if you don't have a friend or son or yourself that has gone and fought and risked everything in the deserts, you and I and every other American who pays taxes has funded this madness, has funded this project of expansionism, of imperialism. And to add insult to injury, it's framed as being somehow to our benefit, that, we have to get cheap oil. It has never been about the oil. I've seen zero evidence that our cost of living has declined over the past 30 years which syncs up with the 30 years of militarism in the Middle East. It's actually longer than 30 years now when you go back to Iraq War I. If you go back to the original interventions in the Middle East, you're talking 50 plus years. In that time frame, we've lost thousands of soldiers. We've blown trillions of dollars. Our national debt is approaching and will probably hit 40 trillion by the end of this year. 40 fucking trillion dollars. The dollar has never been weaker. The cost of living has never been higher. It continues to spiral out of control. There doesn't seem to be any concern for it whatsoever. And yet we have American politicians, and just to make this more macro analysis, this is not about Mike Huckabee. I want to be very clear about that. As much as I don't like Mike Huckabee, it really isn't about him. It's that he is a stand-in for this phenomenon, that we have American politicians, some who are true believers like Mike Huckabee, and then the vast majority who don't give a fuck about what the Bible says, who are doing this because they are under their thumbs, either under the legal framework of, say, AIPAC donations, even though I think it ought to be registered under FARA and probably should not be legal at all, or the more nefarious mechanisms for control, which in my opinion are a product of the Epstein operation, which we'll get into the Wexner testimony a little bit here. Brief interjection before we get back to the completion of that clip. I looked it up, and the most recent figures, the conservative figures, are 70 to 80,000 in terms of overall fatalities from the war in Gaza so far on the Palestinian side. As I said, those are conservative estimates, and those include both military combatants as well as innocent civilians. By my research, the conservative figure for civilian casualties as of now is about 45,000. So Huckabee makes this, in my opinion, pretty wild claim. He says that despite all of the criticisms that the Israeli military or the IDF has received, it's really unfounded because given the amount of precautions they take, in fact, this is the most moral army on the planet, one that is pretty universally being condemned for genocide. But setting that aside, I'm not interested in that debate at all. The claim he's making is that not only are they very moral and not committing war crimes, but in fact, they are the most moral. In fact, they are more moral than our troops, the country that he allegedly represents, which obviously sets Tucker off. But I did some quick math on this because I was like, well, maybe he's right. Maybe this is the least civilian casualties that we've seen in a war like this. It's not, though. And it only took me a minute to find out. So get this. The 20 years of war that the United States fought in Afghanistan, the estimated civilian casualties are about 45,000. So a 20-year war had the same civilian casualties as a 2.5-year war in Gaza. Now, it gets way worse than that, though, because he may argue, well, the figures I saw, it was 44,000 and, 45,000 is more. Okay, Mike, well, let's do a per capita analysis because they like to do that, right? They like to do per capita analysis when it comes to October 7th. It's like, well, let's do per capita. Afghanistan had in 2002, before the war began, 20 million people living there. Gaza had 2.1 million. So just round numbers, say 10x. So you would imagine if we're talking about the same level of recklessness or more recklessness, you would have 10x the amount of casualties in Afghanistan. No, they had the same amount over 20 years. So a population 1/10 the size had the same amount of civilian casualties in 1/8 the amount of time. So most rational, sane people would conclude that, in fact, there was 10x the amount of civilian casualties in the war in Gaza versus the United States war in Afghanistan. Facts are tough, though. So while we were finishing out that clip, I looked it up, and in fact, drumroll please, 15,000 civilian deaths in Ukraine. And you may be thinking, well, maybe the population of Ukraine is just significantly smaller than Gaza. I'm sure none of you are dumb enough to think that. No, the population of Ukraine prior to Russia's invasion was over 40 million people. And there has been 15,000 civilian casualties. Now, I'm not trying to undersell any of that. As far as I'm concerned, every civilian death in a war is a tragedy. So let's just make that very clear. My point is that the two wars that I've looked up, actually, I looked up 3. It does appear that he's right about the war in Iraq because of the vast, shock and awe, the bombing campaigns that the United States did in Iraq. There was immense civilian casualties in Iraq. But the point is that I only looked up 3 modern wars, and 2 of those 3 disprove Huckabee's claims. So why does this matter? Well, because Mike Huckabee is supposed to be like the top envoy on behalf of the United States in our relationship to Israel. And he is lying through his teeth about the reality of that war. And this is so much more egregious than just being diplomatic. I mean, he could certainly say, look, there's been way too many civilian casualties in Gaza, and it's a tragedy. And I really wish Hamas hadn't started that war. You know, that would be like kind of the softest way that you could sell this. He's not doing that. He is carrying overt lies and talking points on behalf of Israel. And why does this matter? Because this is pervasive, not just in our government, but most specifically in the Trump administration. It's basically a requirement for the job. You have to be willing to lie on behalf of Israel if you want to be in the Trump administration. And if you understand the Epstein network, if you understand the Epstein operation, if you understand Les Wexner, if you understand how all of this played out, and you understand Trump's relationship with that network, you have to ask yourself if there's a reason that that's a requirement. Now, thanks to Huckabee's filibuster there, Tucker never got to use his sledgehammer point that he was working towards. So I'm going to complete it for him because it was worth doing, and I knew exactly where he was going with it. Huckabee is arguing that Israel has a right to exist or a right to that land because they function under international law. Well, oops, really bad claim there, because over the past 3 years, since the war in Gaza began, over 200 human rights organizations have come out and condemned Israel for violations of international law explicitly. So obviously that's the point that Tucker was going to hammer him with. He never got the opportunity to. That would have been a holy shit moment. So unfortunately, I'm the only one that gets to do it. I wish the world had got to hear this, but now you guys do at least. The other point that he makes, and I find absolutely fascinating, is he says that they have a right to this land because they've been there for 3,800 years. Well, obviously that's false because that land was possessed by Arabs, or largely Arabs, for a very long time by a conquest. But setting that aside, he's saying that 3,800 years they have been on that land. Okay, that's false, but just pretend that it's true, right? Okay, Homo sapiens, human beings, have been around for 300,000 years. So my argument to him would be, if we can find someone who was on that landmass, who can demonstrate that they have lineage that goes back to that landmass prior to 3,800 years ago, say 4,000 years ago, we got some Egyptian bloodline that demonstrates that they were there. Is it now theirs? And going through that logical progression, you realize how absurd this argument is. I mean, you can't argue that a land that was possessed by people that you don't know, you've never known, you don't even know the names of. I don't know. Obviously, we all have lineage that goes back that far, 4,000 years ago. But like, do we know them? Like, unless you have an incredible capacity for genealogical trees, you don't know who the fuck they were. No, none of us know who they were. Most of us don't even know where they were living. But for one group of people, that is as good as a quitclaim deed. They own it. And given that America was formulated through conquest as well, it's just as absurd to say that, I don't know, the Navajo Indians now have a full legal right to my home in San Diego. Like, what are we even talking about here? But that's what this argument is. It's actually more ludicrous. The Native Americans have a far better claim to that because it's only 300 years ago or 400 years ago. This is 4,000 years ago, and they're making the same argument. But it would never be applicable to any other group of people, and everyone would laugh it out of the room. But for some reason, this claim is taken seriously, and obviously it's because of the Bible. It's because of the worldview, the framework of Christian Zionism. We're not too far into the new year, so I think it's fair to still look at it through the New Year's lens or the resolutions lens. And I just wanted to encourage you guys, if you haven't already, to make sure, especially if you've got a young family at home, to look into a life insurance policy. As you guys know, I lost my father just 6 months ago. It's something that can assist during what is inherently a very tragic and heavy time, but having a life insurance policy in place can alleviate much of that anxiety and concern. And that's why I took on a brand new sponsor in Policy Genius. They're an online insurance marketplace that allows you to compare and contrast insurance policies from different carriers all in one place. It expedites the process, makes it really, really easy. They have a licensed team that really helps you kind of clarify what you're looking for and expedite the process. And if you're cheap like me, most importantly, they help you find the best deal available. Plan the year knowing you've protected what you've built. With Policy Genius, you can see if you can find 20-year life insurance policies starting at just $276 a year for $1 million in coverage. That's per year, not monthly. Head to policygenius.com/lockdown to compare life insurance quotes from top companies and see how much you could save. That's policygenius.com/lockdown. I'm going to stop punishing you with this interview now, because if my blood pressure is rising, I'm sure yours is as well. It's so frustrating. I mean, this is such a straightforward question, and it's such an interesting kind of shape-shifting argument where it's either the Bible or it's some sort of fucking bastardized version of property rights, or it's like basically like a reparations argument, which you'll see I'm not exaggerating or being hyperbolic when it comes to the reparations side of this argument, or it's international law, or it's might makes right, and whatever argument he can make, no matter how full of holes each and every one of them are, other than probably the might makes right argument, which I don't find to be very moral or Christian, but whatever, he's going to just throw everything at you, because all that matters is at the end of the day, you support, stand with, AKA are willing to fight, fund, and die for a country that is not your own. That is the entire functional worldview of Christian Zionists in political office.
Should Israel be expected to even pay one penny to rebuild Gaza at this point?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I'll tell you, if anything, there ought to be reparations to Israel for the extraordinary fight that they have had to conduct to get their hostages back.
See, I wasn't lying. Not only does he have an obvious primary loyalty to a country that is not his own, but additionally, he believes that they should be paid reparations. The Israelis should be paid reparations for their war in Gaza. Holy shit. And this gets so much more appalling when you realize that just yesterday, Donald Trump announced $10 billion US that are going to be going to the rebuilding of Gaza. Well, our ambassador to Israel says that they should pay not a penny to rebuild the tiny sliver of land that they absolutely fucking demolished over the past 2.5 years. What is happening?
I often say the reason they hate Israel is because Israel is small and Israel is close to where they are. And so I believe standing with Israel stands with a country that largely shares the same values that we do. Does that mean I think we should put the interests of America over Israel? No, but I haven't seen an instance where
Did you say, does that
mean
mean we should put the interest of America over Israel? No?
No, does that mean we should put the interest of Israel over America?
Okay, I want to make sure.
All right, if I misspoke, I apologize.
That's a friend of the show, the porcine Randy Fine, saying that, does that mean we should put the interests of America over Israel? No. And then he, thank God PBD caught it. Yeah, that's a Freudian slip if ever there was one, huh? I mean, and this is the problem, is that there are an enormous amount of American politicians that no bullshit believe that. Now, as I said, I don't think most of them believe that on some sort of deep philosophical or ideological basis, but rather the power structure is set up in a way that it incentivizes people who get into those positions of power. If they want to maintain those positions of power, they have no choice but to adopt that worldview and progress it. You literally cannot be in DC for an extended period of time if you're not willing to take that same position as Randy Fine, Lindsey Graham, Rubio, the list goes on and on. Obviously Huckabee, and unfortunately Donald Trump too.
A joint venture between Israel and the United States to help degrade the capability of the Iranian Ayatollah to kill its people would be welcome news in Iran.
Is that already underway?
Well, there's planning for that. The decision hadn't been made, but all these ships are not coming here because it's nice this time of year.
Does the U.S. have a favored candidate? Are we talking about Reza Pahlavi? Because he's around quite a bit.
Yeah, I like him fine, but it's up to the Iranian people. Don't get ahead of yourself. The day after the regime falls will be complicated.
We don't do day after well in the U.S.
That's what you got to quit saying. We, it's not we, it's them. It's not my job to construct a new Iran. It's my job to give them the opportunity to construct a new Iran.
This is the entire neoconservative worldview that I'm sure you and I and basically everyone that listens to this show despise. I mean, this is what we wanted so desperately to get away from. And unfortunately, while Rand Paul and Thomas Massie have been sidelined and MTG has been ousted, in their stead, we now have these fucking demons that are circulating Donald Trump and in his ear, and obviously winning the day when it comes to our foreign policy, as we have the largest contingent of U.S. military might sitting in the Middle East, prepared for what looks like a very, very major war. In fact, the largest buildup of U.S. Troops and munitions since 2003, the Iraq War. But here's the obvious point to be made about Lindsey Graham's bullshit diatribe, is that he's saying, we don't know what happens after the Ayatollah falls. It's not up to us. Basically, his entire worldview is, we just break things and then other people fix them. And we'll see. We'll see how it works out. The truth is, that's not how it plays out, is that as soon as we've broken a country, then our corporations, most of which are campaign donors to Lindsey Graham, go in there and start to pilfer. There's obviously an instantaneous power vacuum that's created, which is rife for corruption and civil war and bloodshed immediately after. And then the point that he never makes, which is obviously the key point, is that this is not about liberating the Iranian people. It's not about liberating the Libyans or the Iraqis or the Afghanis. They're not concerned about women's rights or gay rights or what. None of that is real, and we all know it's not real. The primary motivating factor when it comes to Lindsey Graham and Huckabee and everybody else in our government, when it comes to our foreign policy, is that we topple these nations and we don't care what comes next, because that's the clean break strategy. That's exactly what it is. That if you destroy Israel's enemies in that chaos, it makes it much harder for them to fight back against Israel. So they don't, because they can't, because they're so dysfunctional. That is the clean break doctrine. That's what we've been doing. You and I have been funding and fighting on behalf of that plan for a nation which is not our own for 35 fucking years now. So people go like, if this isn't about some sort of deep-seated anti-Semitism, why are you so upset? Oh, I don't know, because the fate of my nation, if not the fate of the world, and certainly the fate of my children when it comes to economic prosperity or security or safety, are all predicated off of this question. Are we going to ever look after them? Or are we going to continue to sacrifice their future on behalf of a people who are not our own? And that is the biggest question. And unfortunately, the answer is no, we're not going to stop. We are going to continue down this unbelievably godforsaken, and in my opinion, satanic path of sacrificing the best amongst us on behalf of Bibi Netanyahu, who, as far as I'm concerned, is one of the worst amongst us. And why do we do that? Well, aside from the potential for blackmail and obviously the campaign contributions and just cutting checks, the other angle, if John Kiriakou is to be believed, he said this to Julian Dore.
The reason, though, I'm told, that Donald Trump decided to bomb Iran was that the Israelis said, for the first time, if you don't bomb Iran to take out these deep bunkers, we're going to use nuclear weapons. And they had never threatened that before. And so Trump said, bombing Iran might actually save us from the start of World War III if it keeps the Israelis from using nuclear weapons.
So according to your source, the Israelis told the president of the United States that if he did not use the United States military power to bomb the nuclear facilities in Iran, Israel, acting on its own, would use nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
Do you see why there's a problem with that statement, John?
Yeah.
Because they've never admitted that they've had them.
That's right.
So you're telling me that they just admitted to the president of the United States that they have nuclear weapons and we still do not have them in the IAEA treaty.
Now, with all due respect to Julian Dore, who I actually like a lot, he's showing his age there and a little bit of youthful naivete. The big story is not that they acknowledge that they have nuclear weapons. The big story is that they are blackmailing the president of the United States with the threat of using nuclear weapons if we don't fight a war for them. That's the big story. We all know that they have nuclear weapons. The big story is that we're going to go start a massive war to prevent them from, basically via extortion or blackmail, however you want to look at it, and risk World War III so that their top enemy is toppled. Holy shit. Now, I'm going to give two constructive criticisms to Tucker Carlson, and far be it for me to be giving him any sort of constructive criticism, given that he's so unbelievably successful in this arena. However, I will say one thing that really disappointed me, well, first off, kind of a minor error, but a pretty major one actually, is that he said that he believed, or he had read, that President Herzog was in the Epstein files. My understanding, based off of my reading of the files, is that the Herzog reference, because it was just a last name, he believes that it was the president of Israel, the current president of Israel, was on Epstein's island. I don't believe that's true. I think he got that wrong. And for him to bring that as a kind of, skewering question against Mike Huckabee, I think was a big, big mistake, because it undermines his credibility when it comes to everything else. So, just friendly advice, do a little bit better due diligence before you do these interviews. I think that was a mistake. But I think the other biggest, kind of problem I have with Tucker broadly, and I understand why he does it, but he refuses, because Huckabee like every criticism that Tucker would levy, he'd say, we're sacrificing our children's future on behalf of a foreign country, and I don't like it. And then Huckabee, his obvious response was, well, it sounds like you're criticizing Donald Trump. You think Donald Trump's done a bad job? And unfortunately, Tucker, whether it's because of his friendship, or because he wants access to the White House, or he's an insider, or because his audience would abandon him, I'm sure some chunk of them would if he were to go down that path. But the obvious truth is, and I'm sure Tucker feels that way, that yes, this is not just an Obama, Bush, Clinton, Bush thing, or a Biden thing. This is an every president in our lifetime thing, and anybody who's being honest has to acknowledge that fact. All of them carry water for this country. All of them. And I understand that the only way that you get any sort of action in your favor from Donald Trump is to ingratiate yourself to him. And maybe that's what he's doing. And maybe in private, he does tell Donald Trump, look, he's doing the same thing that Charlie Kirk did. This war in Iran, it's a non-starter. Please, please, please don't do it. And maybe by continuing to pretend as if everything Trump does is right, he's able to have more leverage in those private conversations. That's probably true. But just from my vantage point, someone who will never sit down with Trump, because I have no interest in doing so, and he certainly would have no interest in talking to me, is that I would love for Tucker Carlson to just be honest about this, because I think it leaves out the big picture. The big picture being that it doesn't matter who's in the White House. They all are at the mercy of Israel. All of them. And until that changes, we simply don't have a country. We certainly don't have a government.
And she told me, she had talked to so many reporters in mainstream media. I mean, pretty much every outlet you can think of. And they just would not tell her story. She said, every time I would bring up Wexner, they always cut it out. And she told me Wexner's the head of the snake, is what she said. She said of this whole operation, he's the head of the snake. He's the guy, he's the brains of this. He's the guy that's coordinating this all from his, mansions. This is the guy in charge, basically. And essentially, and I mean, other people have said this too. Epstein was basically just like a project manager. He was like mid-level management in terms of this scheme.
Hard pivot. Let's talk about Les Wexner. Holy shit. So I wanted to start off with that Whitney Webb interview with Tim Dillon from back in 2020, because it's prescient and it's very important before we look at the interview of Les Wexner. Les Wexner, for those that aren't familiar, started the Mega Group back in the 1990s, co-founded by Charles Bronfman and Les Wexner, with the explicit goal of basically lobbying and creating leverage on behalf of the nation of Israel. Now, Les Wexner is an American.
Other than Wexner, what were some of the other things that she had told you that specifically mainstream media would not allow her to say or would cut out?
Well, it was specifically anything to do with Wexner and a lot of other things. I mean, it was just so much because, I had read about her story in mainstream media because they reported on her, right? And honestly, she said everything that she had told me, she had told them, and less than 5% ended up in mainstream media. Are
you of the opinion that Wexner is an asset of either a foreign intelligence service or our intelligence service?
She said that he's Mossad. That's what she said.
Right. It does.
He's part of the mob, like the mafia. Right. She said it was like organized crime. And, in my series, I point that out too, that he, has basically documented ties to the National Crime Syndicate, which is the Jewish and Italian mafia.
So let's hear what Les Wexner had to say yesterday in his defense.
Epstein stole or otherwise misappropriated several $100 million from Wexner. That misconduct, together with the fees that Epstein paid himself for his services to Wexner, appears to account for virtually all of Epstein's wealth. So several $100 million is a large but not precise figure. To the best of your knowledge, how much exactly did Epstein steal?
I don't know. I don't think I'll ever know.
I'd like to try to understand a little bit better how Epstein was able to steal or misappropriate that many funds. One way, reportedly, is that the trusts that we described earlier, which I know you said you have no recollection of, I just want to be thorough. The trusts that he was trustee of would receive gifts of limited stock, and he would then sell that stock on the New York Stock Exchange and then use a portion of those proceeds for his own personal purposes. Do you have any knowledge or recollection of what I just described?
I'm effing surprised. I'm shocked. I didn't know this.
Is it that you have not previously heard what I just described?
I never heard of it, never saw this document.
And it was publicly reported, I think, by ABC several years ago, but not ever on your radar.
Never.
So that's Les Wexner, a guy who, in 1991, signed a power of attorney over to Jeffrey Epstein. He's also, to this day, the richest man in the state of Ohio. And he was robbed to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars by Jeffrey Epstein, who had a power of attorney over his estate. And Les Wexner, the richest man in Ohio, wants you to believe that he had no idea. He had no idea. Let me tell you, as a former money manager, a guy who managed hundreds of millions of dollars, I knew a lot of rich people. And let me tell you, none of them would misplace over $100 million. Doesn't ever fucking happen. You don't become a billionaire by losing hundreds of millions of dollars and you just don't even look into it. You don't even know that it's occurred. So how did Wexner get in contact with Epstein, you might be wondering?
As that business relationship became closer and you eventually hired him, I assume he pitched his services in some way. What was his way of framing what he was offering to you?
I think it was his experience at an industrial level, like working for a big company like Bear Stearns. And then he had done personal work for the Rothschild family in France.
Personal wealth management, essentially?
I don't know.
So he doesn't have a fucking clue what skill set Jeffrey Epstein brought to the table. All he knows is that he worked with the Rothschilds. This is classic Russian espionage, is it not, folks? Oh my God. Oh, it's so crazy. I mean, it's so crazy that we even have to actually make an argument when the evidence is just all so in your face as to what this was. So the reason I wanted to tie these two stories together is because I think that the obvious concern for most people that have paid attention to both of these stories or both of these narratives over the past couple years is that how intertwined are they? How much does I'm not even saying specifically the Epstein operation. I'm saying what the Epstein operation entailed. What was it broad-based? And if you believe, as I do, that it was about creating leverage or gaining favor with rich and powerful people in corporate America, as well as in governments all over the world, that was it, about sexual compromise? And if that is part of it, then is that the reason that so many of our politicians don't represent us? Because I think the truth is that regardless of how much leverage can be applied through organizations like AIPAC and, just funding campaigns and funding competitors against people like Massey or MTG, if they get out of line, I think most of us recognize at this point that the worldview of Zionism is it's such an existential battle. Is like that's their perspective all the time. It's like existential battle. As they're conquering all of their neighbors, they're existentially under threat. They're always the victim, even though they're demolishing everybody around them. And once you kind of come to terms with that, you look at it and you go, okay, do you think it's really limited to just campaign contributions? Like, do you think that they're not taking it to the next level? And I think most people, even if you weren't sure about what the Epstein operation entailed, just the cover-up of it, given all of the evidence we have as to what it did entail, and then the cover-up of it by our own government, tells you that there is something fucking enormous going on here. Because it's not just about protecting the richest man in Ohio. It's not just about combating anti-Semitism. It's much, much bigger. And I think that this is the reason I've spent the past 4 or 5 episodes now talking about the Epstein thing, is because I think that it's all part of the bigger kind of functional narrative, like how our system truly functions at its core, which is why the algorithm has not been liking me lately, because I think I'm really fucking onto it right now. I think I'm really, really like over the target big time. So if you agree, share this show around, because if you don't support Liberty Lockdown, if you don't support me, Clint Russell, hi again, then you're stuck with these fucking lemmings, which have filled in for Charlie Kirk after his untimely demise.
But listen, there are things happening in the background at the DOJ that we just need to keep our eyes on. And we need to sort of say, listen, the wheels of justice turn slowly sometimes, but they are happening, okay?
So we should remember that for a lot of people, this has become a political cause out of proportion to what is actually proven, what is actually provable. And yeah, more might be coming, but we should remember that there is a lot of, we've been through a few rounds of lawfare in our time.
It's sad. It honestly makes me sad. But I just wanted to say, I am still following the Charlie Kirk case very closely. If you guys are interested in me doing a update episode, I have quite a bit to talk about at this point. I haven't done one in like, I don't know, maybe a month now. So if you're interested, to drop a comment down below, let me know. If there's enough interest, I will do one. And if there's not, then I'll just keep it moving. There's a hell of a lot of news happening. So I've got my pick of the litter. Please do hit the like button, subscribe, and share this show around. And most importantly, hug and kiss your family. Love you guys. Peace.
Yeah, I don't anticipate Leslie Wexner being arrested at any point. He is far too powerful. His money is everywhere. And honestly, he has extremely deep ties to numerous officials in the Israeli government through his philanthropies. He focused pretty much the bulk of the Wexner Foundation on training up prominent figures first in the U.S. and the Jewish community in particular. And now those fellows, those Wexner fellows, essentially run AIPAC. It has an extremely close relationship with AIPAC.
Subscribe to Liberty Lockdown. Great podcast. Clint is tight.